Okay, so yeah, so this is story time for two of the 9.2 features. We're going to talk about the copy data source capability for in the context of RCC setup, and then the data purging capability in the context of data retention. So, Awan, would you like to talk about the RCC setup feature first, the problem
Sure.
statement that we're trying to address?
Yeah. So, we've made a lot of changes and improvements to the release command center, making it easier to configure and configure the release command center for each release. But still, that means that for each release, the user would have to start from scratch, creating all of the configurations, to ingest data from the various tools with the right filters and everything for, Jira, Jenkins, etc. So the common pattern, and this is something that came, from the field initially we talked when we showed the changes to the release command center. This was the natural next step, was when we create a release, rather than having to create from scratch, most of the time there might just be small adjustments to the filters and searches that are being used for each configuration. So the more natural thing is for a user to want to be able to start from an existing release and then be able to modify it if needed. So the problem we're solving is just the overhead of starting from scratch, rather than having, a starting point where you're looking at the last release and copying the configurations from that release when you start a new release command center setup.
Thanks, Avan. So yeah, and I've shared the link to the problem statement that Avan had put out in the Jira system as well, so we can see what's the impact of this and why it's needed. So in terms of the capability, uh, this is a capability we want to provide through the user interface to users. The ability to create copies for data sources from the backend is already available through the standard API. So this is more of a UI focused feature. So that I'll just walk through the proposed UI changes that are going to be made as part of this story. So like Avan mentioned, so this is one of the things that happens when the user is creating a copy of a release from an existing release. We're not copying the existing data sources because there is a need to be able to make some changes to those data sources while the user is doing this copy. So we want it to be an explicit action for the user to take, to say, yes, I want to create a copy of the data sources, and for each of those copies, they can then decide whether they want to include it in the new release, or and if so, what changes, if any, they want to make to it. So the workflow would be, so one workflow is in the context of creating a new release using an existing release as a copy. So this is existing screen that you would have. Let me move this thing here. So once the user, when the user is in the workflow of creating a new release using an existing one as a copy, there'll be a new option where they can select, where they'll be prompted to say whether they want to create or whether they want to copy data sources as well, if the data sources are available in the original release. If they say next and they've filled out all the other relevant information in the context of the release copy, and the copy will get created. So this is just a screen where the checkbox has been checked. I say okay here as a user, the release gets created, not the copies of data sources yet. And then the user will be prompted with all the data sources from the original release that they can now choose to copy into the new release they've just created. So I can, as a user, go select, click on any of them one by one and say I'm creating a copy and make changes, right? So let's say I've selected one of these, and I'm just quickly walking through these screens. Just feel free to stop me anytime if there are any questions. So this is just another version of that. So let's say, so once I click on that copy icon, this is what shows up. And this is your standard copy object dialog box, right? So we have similar patterns where the new name is the original name copy, and then you see the fields that can then be modified. So this is how the flow would go. Once I've said okay, once I make the changes, I hit OK. I have my copy created, and I'm back to this list page, right? And this list will show that this data source has already been copied. So one thing I was noticing here is that um, um, once a copy has been made, it should the copy icon should get disabled, because I've already, as a user, I've created a copy, so it should not be enabled anymore. So I'm not sure if uh, this has been fully like this has been clarified from UX perspective. Do we need that clarification? But I feel functionally that's how it should work. Awan, what do you think about this one?
I mean, if they were to click it again, they would just start from scratch again, making the copy.
So it would lose their original
Original copy.
copy. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can give them the flexibility to, if they think they've made a mistake in it or something, they could start again.
Okay. So I think we'll have to make sure that it's implemented that way. Then that when if the user like clicks on the copy again, it resets back, and you're basically just creating that copy.
But what about, well, should we delete previous one?
I mean, is it simpler to just disable it at that point? Disable the copy?
So yeah, that's an option. The other option could be maybe we go into the edit path in that case.
Yeah. That would, but then we would need a whole new
Yeah,
way to get there, right?
yeah. Then it's not a copy; it's an edit. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be what makes the most sense, is to be able to go back and edit it if needed, right?
Yeah. So I made create this as an open, like track this as an open item. We can clarify if you want to edit the existing one, yeah, maybe we just need a path into that. If it's an edit icon or something like that, maybe, and then copy gets disabled.
Yeah, I mean, if it's possible to do, otherwise we can go down the path of disabling it.
Okay.
But being able to edit it and view it then makes sense.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so moving on. So once a copy has been made, there's an indication that it's copied. The user can.
I'm sorry, Rashid. One thing, can you, after those meeting, create a Jira, because we already implemented this one, and about this edit behavior.
Sure. Yeah, I'll create the Jira, and maybe we can, because we need some work on the UX side as well for if we want to do the edit option. So, and we can track it through that Jira. Once we have a resolution, UI can take that and implement it based on that. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So once a copy has been created, the user can has an option on the screen to also undo that copy, right? So the idea is that this copied icons are clickable. So if I check it, it becomes no longer a copied version, right? Which means in effect we are deleting this copy at this point. So this is how you would manage when a release is being copied. Like how this is how you would manage copies of data sources themselves. So this is one pathway. The other is the more traditional pathway of when you're creating an object itself, we allow you to create it using an existing instance of that object. So similarly for data sources, when a new data source is being added, in addition to like I'm just jumping screens because there are, since I'm going through these UX screens, there are screens which are not related to the functionality. So again, feel free to stop me if any clarification is needed. But so this is the other use case, right? So now, in addition to just creating a new data source, there'll be an option to say copy existing. So it's a similar pattern that we have in other parts of the application, where if you're creating a new application or a release, you can copy existing, and it shows you that a copy of that existing object that you can then modify. So in this case, once I select copy existing, I see that this seems a little. Oh yeah, so this is the selection screen where I'm selecting the original data source itself that I want to copy. So this dialog box would show the current project and release, and then I can select by default from which to select a data source to copy, or I can choose to change these selections to whatever I want, and then select the data source that needs to be copied. So one thing to note is that this copy path was triggered from a specific data source type. So I'm in the path where I'm trying to add a copy of a data source of type user stories. So the options we see here should be restricted to the same type, and the type selection is disabled here. And it's defaulted to the type that I'm coming from as a user, right? So I'm in the user stories section, and that's why it's this way. So once you've selected the copy, then it's like the standard pattern, right? If you see the existing fields in that data source that you can modify, give it a new name. By default, it'll be original name copy. And that's it. So this is the pathway, or this is the workflow for creating a new data source from an existing data, or using an existing data source as a copy. Are there any questions on this? Okay, so in that case, I'll move on to the next feature. So the next feature is, the next feature is the data purging capability in data retention that we added in 9.1. So Awan, do you want to give a introduction for this?
Sure. So this one has been around for a while. It is a problem that, most of our customers will come across eventually. With more usage of the system, the database is going to start to fill up, especially the more processes you run, whether they're deployments, jobs, or pipelines. The runtime objects in the database just continue to grow. And, there are two reasons that users want to keep, trim that down. One is just, maintaining the size of their database, not having to have such a large database. But then once the database gets to certain limits, we've seen with some customers, especially with the job step table, that it starts to impact performance of the system as well. So those are two important reasons where users need to be able to start cleaning up the specifically the runtime objects that are continuously created in the system. And so up until now, the option that users have had is to work with EC admin that, Laurent had created in professional services. And for me, when I started with Electric Cloud 7 years ago, I was in professional services, and this is probably one of the first things I wrote also for Qualcomm, was a job deletion procedure before Laurent had done EC admin. So this problem has been there for many years. There are many customers who have requested this over the years, and I'm really happy to see that we've brought it into the product now. I'm sad that Laurent isn't here to see it, but the problem is one that has been there for a long time. So, we've just extended what we started in 9.1 with the archiving, and purging is really the problem that has impacted many more of our customers. So this is going to be a big win for us with those customers.
Okay, thanks, Awan. Yeah, so like Awan mentioned, right? So we started this the data management or the data retention capability in at least at the product level in 9.1. And yeah, earlier EC admin was the way to manage data, and I think it's there at every customer deployment. Like that's the one non out of the box plugin that pretty much every customer has, because this this like the data cleanup is a definite need that's in the system. And in fact, like even we for our chronic keys instance need this capability, right? So it's something that, yeah, I really feel that would be really useful for customers. So in 9.1 we'd added the data retention capability at the platform level to manage archiving and purging for certain data sets which tended to grow large over a period of time, like jobs, deployments, and so on. And then we'd exposed the archiving definitions, or the capability to define archiving rules through or to define data retention rules for archiving through the UI. Now we're extending that to purging as well. So the general the data retention screens or management screens that we had will be modified to accommodate both purging and archiving capability. So for this specific feature, and of course there's some backend enhancements also done as part of this to clean up workspaces associated with jobs and deployments and so on. So I'll talk about that also in a bit. So for this particular feature, we've gone with Dev UX. So that's why you'll see screenshots. So this is like we've between Awan, Artyom, and I, we discussed how the existing screens should be morphed to support data purging. And you'll see these screenshots and not in InVision, but it's really just paint. But so here the intent is to show what the expected behavior should be in terms of how, what options are available on the screen. I think the specifics of, like the label, sizing, icons, and so on, I think we can retain whatever is currently implemented on those screens, right? So that's basically the idea. So I'll just go top down in terms of how it's changing from end user perspective. So in 9.1, we had archive as a menu, as a top level menu option under administration. So now we're going to change it to a much more general phrase for using data management as the general phrase. And then once the user, the navigation will lead the user to the same location as before, where they can see the list of data retention rules that have been defined in their system. And the data retention rule definition itself has been extended to accommodate purging as well, like I said, right? So now once I go in and I'm trying to create a new data retention rule, I can most of the things stay the same. So what type of objects I want to define the rule for is the same. What's the age criteria to use and other criteria to use remain the same. The one addition is, or one of the additions is to select the action I want to take based on this particular data retention rule. So earlier we were only defining, or the user was only able to define archive retention rules through the UI. So this was not an option that they had to select. So now they can choose between defining a purge rule or an archive rule. So this is a new addition that we're adding. So once you define and purge will be the default option. So once you select this action, everything else remains pretty much the same. In the context of this action, you can say purge and it continues. There are few refinements to what we had earlier to accommodate these changes. So those have been sort of clarified here. So this is really just about placement of these options. So earlier include sub-releases was before purge. So now we want to make it closer to the action itself. So if I've selected archive as the action to take for this retention rule, I should be able to immediately see the following option after it saying, oh, do you want to purge the data after archiving as well? So some changes, we're proposing some changes to sort of just streamline that flow that's there for these options. So once you select archive, you can select purge data after archiving. Earlier, we used to display this warning message down below if the checkbox was selected. Instead, we're converting it to a regular tooltip. So anywhere purge is an option, purge is displayed as an option, there'll be a tooltip with sort of a similar text saying, "Oh, purging data will remove it forever from your system." And so that's just a minor change related to that. In terms of functional changes, the other big change is related with workspaces. Let me see. And funny enough, I don't have a screenshot of that. Okay, but I can talk through that. So, like I mentioned earlier, so when we're talking about data purging, another sort of entity or another actor which needs to be purged, or where we see this requirement, is with workspaces associated with jobs as well, right? So if a customer is running a lot of jobs are writing out to the workspace directory. So as there is an explosion of jobs, there is also an explosion of workspace files or workspace folders associated with these jobs in the workspaces that have been defined. So we want to, so we're extending the purge capability when the user is defining the purge rules for jobs and deployments to also have them choose to clean up the associated workspace. So the way it'll work is similar to how when the user selects completed releases, we give them an option to say, oh, do you want to include sub-releases also in this retention rule? Similar to that, if they select completed deployments or completed jobs, instead of the include sub-releases option, they'll see the option to say clean up associated workspaces as well, right? So they'll see this option. So I've described it in words. I don't have a screenshot for it, unfortunately, but I'm hoping that it's clear enough in terms of the requirement that this is the expectation. So once the user selects deployments or completed jobs, they'll see clean up workspace as an option here. So, and then you just, that's what becomes your data retention rule for that particular set of jobs or deployments, right? That I want to clean up jobs with these characteristics, and while the jobs are being deleted, also purge the associated workspace files for those jobs. So that's the requirement related to workspace cleanup. And so this was something that is in terms of the data retention services itself, this was a new capability that we're adding in 9.2. So we've done backend enhancements also to support this capability. So it means there's new options in the data retention rule APIs. The data retention service has been enhanced to handle workspace cleanup as well. So that's also part of this particular feature. The last screen is really just about the list page changes. Oh, actually not this screen. Yeah, this one. So this is really about the list page changes that need to happen to accommodate data retention rules for both purging and archiving, right? So till 9.1, we only had this one purge column. So if you're defining an archiving rule, like I said, till 9.1, we were only defining archiving rules through the UI, but there was also this add-on option to say, oh, if you're archiving, do you want to go ahead and purge the data once it's been archived? So for that, there was an indication through this purge column where you would see this purge icon. Now we're extending that to also include a column for archive. So it can be that if I've defined a purge only rule, then the purge column will be populated. If I've defined an archive only rule, then we'll have just the archive column light up. And then if I've defined an archiving rule and said also purge the data afterwards, both the columns sort of have that indication, right? So the idea is that the user can at a glance tell, oh, what's going to happen to the data that's defined for this particular data retention rule. So you can see that. So that's pretty much all the changes that we want to be able to do as part of this feature. So mostly it's a UI driven change, except for the workspace cleanup, which also has backend impact, right? So we've done some performance testing, and I think we continuing to do that as well. But that's pretty much all for the features. Actually, there's just one more minor thing. So we've now that for the data retention rule, we've generalized it to include both purging, archiving as two capabilities or actions that can be done. We want to introduce a new icon for the user, right? So these icons should be changed based to reflect data retention as the data management as the entity it's representing. So there's a small UX dependency to have that icon show up here and in the menu option. That's pretty much it for this feature. Are there any questions for this?
I had a question just on the
Yeah.
performance testing, Urvashi. It might be, well, I guess just input. It might be good to we can talk to Neil about kind of the high limits we're seeing. Qualcomm comes to mind, and make sure that we're kind of taking those numbers into account.
Sure. Yeah, we can. I think we in 9.1 for archiving, I think we were going with the numbers we got for Qualcomm because they were on the higher end.
Yeah, they're doing like 100,000 jobs a day or something.
Yeah, we can talk. Yeah, I think I'll reach out to Neil also to see if we can get more metrics for other customers. But yeah, I feel like if we can handle Qualcomm numbers, we'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that side of it because I know he had a lot of kind of it might be good just to have a conversation with him, and I can set that up as well just to get because he has a lot of experience with the issues people hit.
Sure. So is that something that you can help with?
Yeah, I can coordinate that.
Okay, that sounds good, Aman. Yeah, and I know that we did get numbers from you for Qualcomm in 9.1. So maybe
Yeah,
we just need to know for these numbers what is the associated workspace volume we're looking at, because that's the thing we've added on in 9.2. So that's what
that's
we
true.
need to measure.
Okay, that sounds good. But otherwise, it's looking good. I'm very excited for this feature to be in the product and available for our customers. And it's at a good time as some of our new larger customers are ramping up. They'll have this available where they won't have to hit limits and then look for something.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I think this one is something that I feel that customers should be able to start using pretty much out of the box.
Yeah,
Right? Because with archiving, there is some expectation of setup they have to do, manage what their archiving system is and all that. Versus here, yeah, if they know, okay, these are, jobs which are being used for maybe lower end environments, we're okay to delete them after 6 months, 3 months, or maybe in Qualcomm's case, after a week, then yes, they can use it.
yep, exactly. It's going to be very helpful.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Owen. Any other questions from the team? Any clarifications? No, okay, then in that case we're done. I'll send out the recording. Let me just pause it.